So, welcome back. Flying right in the face of public demand. Here's another video about time travel in Avengers Endgame. So look, like I said to you before, time travel in movies is a narrative plot device. Okay, it's got nothing to do with real science. The producers of Endgame having argued that they consulted a load of physicists on how time travel might really work. They might as well have said we consulted a load of professional physicists on whether Captain America, spoiler alert, could wield Mjolnir. In fact, knowing professional physicists, you would probably get a more expert answer on that question than on the actual question of time travel. I'm going to do you another video, which is going to be a seriously good one, about how time travel might actually work given our current knowledge of the laws of physics and the implications that might have for how fictional narratives work. I'm also going to address the question that Stephen Hawking asks, which is if time travel is ever possible, is even theoretically possible, then where are all the time travellers? I've got an answer to that, which I think makes some sort of sense. Anyway, look, let's not pick holes for the sake of it in the way time travel is dealt with in Avengers Endgame, but, like we say, they threw shade at other movies, especially Bill and Ted, where it's dealt with very, very consistently. So they asked for it. No, the thing I want to talk to you about is this Captain America thing at the end. Now, again, narratively, this is where this comes from. They obviously wanted to give Captain America this ending that was kind of a mirror image, the yin and yang, yin and yang, the mirror image, the black and white of how they dealt with Tony. Tony Stark makes a selfless, ends with a selfless act. Selfish man making a selfless act. Steve Rogers is a selfless man who ends up making a selfish act. The question is, how selfish is his decision to go back in time to 1945, we infer, and live his life with Peggy? Or live the rest of his life, the rest of his future Steve's life, and the entirety of real Peggy's life. Now, how does that work? Again, it blows a complete hole. They violated their own stated rules. They said, will that create? And the Russos have said in post-Endgame interviews that it's a branched timeline, an alternative reality. Well, by their own rules, that's not possible if the 6 Infinity Stones exist in the universe at that time, which in 1945 they do, so they've already done something which they've stated is impossible. They don't care. They're giving up. They're not booked to do any more movies, so they've basically just done what the writers of every episode of 24 did. It's like the game where you draw a head and a neck, and then the end of the neck, and you fold the paper over and pass it on. It's not your problem, is it? You've just created a problem for the next person. You see, if they were so close to doing something interesting, if they had taken this idea that the Infinity Stones, that one of their roles is to maintain a linear timeline, a linear reality, a non-changing and non-branching reality while they exist, then that would, and then Douglas Adams, like I said in my previous video, had done all the hard work for them, then sort of follow that through. It gives you a really interesting version of Steve Rogers. Because the thing I want to ask you, other people have picked holes in exactly, what does Steve's journey involve, going back with the Soul Stone, and what does he do, and how does he find, how does he get the Reality Stone back into Natalie Portman and all that? Fine, other people have done that, and those are legitimate questions, and if you're bothered, then it doesn't stand up to the slightest scrutiny. The point is this. The point I would ask is, how the hell does that conversation between future Steve, going back to 1945, and Peggy Carter go? I mean, presumably he appears sometime fairly soon after 1945 Steve has disappeared into the ice, and she goes, "Oh, Steve, I thought you were dead." And he goes, "Oh, well, I am, but I'm not, because I'm frozen in ice, but actually that's not me, I'm future Steve." And, future Steve is not the same, 2023 Steve is not the same, as we see quite clearly, he's not the same as 2014 Steve, let alone 1945 Steve. Future Steve swears and, does selfish things. And so, does he pretend to be 1945 Steve? In which case, that's a really selfish act, isn't it? That's fraud. So he fraudulently gets in with Peggy, or he explains, I'm Steve from the future, and I've come back with, a suitcase of Viagra and swearing. Neither of which might be a deal breaker for Peggy. Who knows? She's British anyway, so she's probably perfectly comfortable with all the implications of this new development. So anyway, but the point is, even if that's the case, let's say we take that's the case, then what happens if we take the linear timeline? So the Russos have copped out by saying, oh well, it's a branch timeline, alternative timeline, where Peggy never gets married to the other guy and doesn't have kids and that. But if they'd only copped their own logic, the implications of their own logic, they could have come up with something much more interesting, which is that during the entirety of the actual 1945 to 20, whatever it is, Avengers timeline, Peggy was actually having an affair, an extramarital affair with future Steve, who was keeping himself hidden in the shed in the allotment or something, and maybe was the father of the real father of some or all of Peggy's children, or it kind of makes the whole thing with Peggy's grandniece or whatever a bit questionable, doesn't it? But it's a much more interesting scenario than the one they described, which is, oh, it's a branch timeline, and then really old Steve comes back to this one, and the multiverse. Look, the multiverse is a narrative plot device. It's a brilliant one, and it makes for great storytelling, and an literally infinite number of ways of telling the same stories, and that's fabulous from the point of view of superhero stories as modern myths. But let's not pretend it has any basis in real physics. Which brings me back to what I'm going to do in the next video, which, as I say, is deal with how time travel could actually work in terms of physics and in terms of the philosophical implications, and dealing with this question that Stephen Hawking sets of where are all the time travelers if time travel exists. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Keep liking, keep subscribing, keep commenting, and any questions, let me know. I'll do my best to answer them.